All right, well, good evening. We are going to go ahead and get started. And you might be saying, hey, I've been in meetings with Heath before. He's already got a voice made for a high school cafeteria, so why are we using a microphone? Well, we are recording this budget town hall, and we will post that. And because we're recording it, we have to use the microphone. And so when we get to the part where there's questions and answers, we're also asking you to speak into the microphone. And again, it's because we want to make sure that we're always being transparent in anything, especially when it comes time to talk about budget. We always want to make sure that we're, making sure that we're transparent and upfront, and so this will go on the website. We have one of our board members here. Actually, I have two board members here, and the third that is coming because I think he's changing his clothes right now. So we have President Matt Fuller. He will be here in a minute. We have our board secretary, Miss Linda Porton, and we have Lori here as well. Are we missing anyone else, Lori? Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. So, and then we have a few board candidates, and so if you guys want to wave your hands, perfect. All right, so Budget Town Hall. This is part of our commitment in Montgomery ISD to make sure that we have good budget processes. And good budget processes really are having a plan to get from thoughts, recommendations, ideas, to ultimately one of the most important things the board has to do is to vote for a budget. That budget should reflect the highest priorities of the school district in terms of our commitment to truly making sure that we are educating each and every one of the over 9,000 students that we're honored and privileged to educate each and every day to their fullest potential. And one of the best ways that we can make sure that we are meeting that educational responsibility is taking care of our employees, because it is our teachers and support staff and administrators that take care of that responsibility. So that budget is really, really critical and really, really important. And in the past, coming as the new superintendent, and as I've been asking the question, what do we do well? What could we do better? There's been a lot of questions in the past about how we've done the budget. And a lack of transparency, at least a perception of lack of transparency. And so we did a budget town hall a little over a month ago, and at that budget town hall we talked about how we derive revenue to fund the district. We talked about currently how revenues are being expended. We talked about some state funding formulas, and really try to almost, I think, Kris, we called it a budget 101. And we got a lot of positive response from that, and that was posted on the website. Tonight, we're really trying to start talking about the evolution of the budget process. And one of the things that we are doing much differently this year is, because the budget should reflect the highest priorities of the school district, the most important thing and one of the highest priorities we have is how we compensate our employees. And suffice to say, we're talking about this several times tonight. Our employee compensation is not where it needs to be. We need to be more competitive. And so as we're starting this budget process, we're making better compensation of our hardworking, amazing employees the highest priority as I get ready to recommend a budget to the board. And because we're going to do that, we're going to do something that is a little different in Montgomery ISD, and that is we're going to present an employee compensation plan to the board. And so we're talking about that tonight. So tonight, we're going to update you on some of the anticipated revenue that we think we may be getting. We're going to talk to you about some efficiencies that we're trying to find. We're going to talk about what we're trying to do for employees. And then the most important part will be obviously to answer any questions or take suggestions that you have, because we are a much better district when we're getting that public input. So just to recap from our last budget town hall, different districts, there are over 15,000 school districts across the country, and some school districts get the majority of their revenue from the state, others get a large chunk of their revenue from federal sources, others do a combination. In Montgomery ISD, the majority of our revenue that we have to create our budget comes from local sources, local property taxes. We get a much smaller but significant portion from the state. And then we get a very, very small percentage in terms of federal dollars. So, as we begin to develop the budget, what's really important, and I think as Lori and Linda will share, and Matt, if he was in here, is everything we try to do, we do using data. And when we don't have the data, we have to go out and get the data. And we want the data to be data that really has been research-based, and that the data really is data that, as best we can, every chance we have, we can authenticate. And so as we started to put together this budget, there were some things that we really needed to look at. Because the majority of our budget is spent on people, and coming in as a brand new superintendent, I was constantly hearing that our compensation across the board for all of our employee groups was not where it needed to be. We needed to be able to get some data to tell us how are we doing with our teachers, beginning teachers, mid-year teachers, more seasoned teachers, how are we doing with professional, clerical, auxiliary. So getting a review of district compensation was very, very important. Because 80 to 85% of any school district budget is people, it's how much we pay them, what are their benefits, and then ultimately how many people. We needed to look at how we staff our schools and our programs, and are we competitive there? Are there areas that we need to enhance staffing? Are there areas where we are maybe overly generous compared to districts that look like us? And that has been part of this as well. Additionally, we engaged and the board voted on a demographic study that we actually just got the results of. That demographic study is hugely important because there is a difference, especially when it comes budget time, for a district that's growing, and how do you create a budget that addresses a growing school district versus a district that remains flat or actually is declining in enrollment. And one of the biggest areas you find when you are a growing district, there's additional revenue that comes with that. When you are a declining in enrollment district, there are budget challenges. And so the demographic study becomes hugely important. And the good news is we are and will continue to be for the foreseeable future a growing school district, and that's good news. We are doing a facilities assessment because unlike many school districts that have a separate operating budget and then they have a capital budget, and the operating budget goes to the how do we make sure we have effective classrooms with good curricular materials, and how do we have great staffing models with really excellent staff in our schools, and that's your operating budget. Other school districts have a capital budget that when there's a chiller that goes out or you need to address some maintenance issue in a school, there's a separate budget. In Montgomery ISD, there's one budget. So we have a facilities assessment that is going to each of our 10 campuses and all the different offices that we have in the school district to assess how are our facilities, where are their needs, what are some anticipated things that we're going to need to be planful for, so that if a chiller were to go out or there are heating or air conditioning challenges within a school, we can start to be more planful of that and do a better job of long-range planning. And then also, obviously, a financial audit. We did complete an audit early in the past year, and that audit tells us, are we doing a good job being good fiscal officers of taxpayer dollars, and if not, where are areas that we need to improve on. So all of these are data pieces that have been start of how we are trying to create the budget for this upcoming year. So as we have looked at these different pieces of data, I think the one thing that is most compelling to me is coming in, and I was asking the question, what is great about Montgomery ISD? And it just, no matter where I was, whether I was at a school, whether I was with parents, whether I was at community events, everyone continually had the same answer. Your employees are the best thing about Montgomery ISD. You're great employees, great students. That's what makes this an amazing school district. That's good to know. I mean, that's what you want to hear as the brand new superintendent. When I ask consistently where are areas that we could do better, consistently I heard you're not competitive with pay for those great employees, and we're really worried that those great employees are going to go elsewhere and we can't afford to lose them. And so that's why getting the data was important, because those thoughts that were being shared during my entry plan, now we have the data to show us that's absolutely true. And so we know we need to do something about that. And so looking at the compensation reviewed, which really looks at how do we compare to our 8 regional competitors. While it's interesting how we compare to a district that might be on the east side of Texas or even in a different state, we're not really competing for talent. And so we're not trying to get their really good teachers, they're not trying to get ours, but when it comes to Conroe, Magnolia, Willis, Splendora, we need to be cognizant of what they are paying our teachers and other employees, and to make sure that we're in line so that compensation never becomes the reason why a really great employee at Montgomery ISD looks elsewhere. And so we know that from that study, as we prepare this budget, that for us to have very competitive wages for all of our employees, but especially to prioritize teachers, we knew that we were going to need to find somewhere between $3 to $4 million. I'd like to, at this point, introduce, if you don't know him already, Kris Lynn, who is he's starting to wear a lot of hats. He is our Chief Financial Officer, but also our Chief Operating Officer, and currently our Interim Chief Human Resources Officer. So, Kris.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. And I may repeat a couple of his comments just so that you know the things that we say up here tonight aren't just words. They truly are things that we believe. And so I hope, as Dr. Morrison said, being new to the district, we were finding out the things that we did well as a district and things that we needed improvement on. And, as painful as it is being the new CFO in town, one of the things that we continually heard was, we need more transparency. We need to do a better job with the finances of the district. And so we get that. We hear you. This purpose of tonight's meeting is to try and be as transparent as we possibly can be. And so I hope that over the course of my time here during the last year, you've seen a change in how this district is operating financially. And just like the data that Dr. Morrison talked about earlier, we needed all of those data sets to give us information. And what all of that information has really shown to us is that there is a call to action. When we started sharing information with our campus principals and our senior leadership team, it was really kind of jaw-dropping, some of this information. And every single one of them stood up and said, it's time for us to do something. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish in this year's budget. Now keep in mind, we're not going to be able to fix everything in one budget, okay? But let's get started down a path where we're making improvements year after year after year. And so one of the first steps that we took, as Dr. Morrison said, was hiring TASB to do a staffing review. And this is one of the pages out of their staffing review. And there's a couple of interesting numbers on this page that I want to point out. And I know it's a little hard for you in the audience to see, but one of those numbers is on the very top line, and that is our total student enrollment. So from 2015 until 2020, during that time period, student enrollment grew by over 10%. That's a good thing. As Dr. Morrison said, a growing district is a good district. That provides more financial resources for us. One of the concerning numbers on the page is the last number, and that over that same period of time, total personnel across the district grew by almost 18%. So while our student enrollment was growing 10%, our personnel was growing 18%. To be a financially stable and healthy school district, that trend cannot continue, okay? And so that's what we were asking TASB's help for, is where can you help us identify some efficiencies throughout this process? Now, another interesting number, and I just pointed out just simply because everybody always likes to pick on us, and that's okay, we're good with it. What about administration? You have too many administrators. If you notice, during that same time period, the only negative number on that sheet is a decrease in the number of administrative staff throughout the district, okay? So we continually keep that in our minds. And as Dr. Morrison said, I personally know the CFO. When our operations guy left, he picked up those duties. I know other senior leadership members, as people have left throughout the year, have picked up additional duties. And so that is on the forefront of our minds. Dr. Morrison said that, when we're looking at data, we want to make sure that we're looking at the right set of data. And so when we're looking at compensation information, we want to look at those districts that are the closest to us, the ones that we're competing with for talent. Now, when we're looking at staffing, we told TASB, we don't want to just look at our regional competitors. We want to look at districts who look like Montgomery ISD across the state of Texas. So roughly the same number of kids, roughly the same type of kid, same demographics, okay? And so they picked 14 districts across the state, and these are the 14 districts that they used in their comparison for Montgomery ISD, okay? And This report is on the district website, so I would encourage you to go and check out the full report. Obviously, we can't cover the whole thing here tonight, but it's under the financial transparency page of the district website if you want to take a look. And so TASB, being a third party, we are not obligated to take any of their recommendations. All they're doing is providing us with information that they've identified through best practices across the state, okay? They came in and they said, hey, we'll give you two options on ways to become more efficient in your staffing throughout the district. Option one, they said, if you do these things, you could find about $3.7 million in staffing efficiencies. Now, I understand that's a big number. That sounds great, but it's painful. Okay, the district had already been in a process of trying to find efficiencies for the last several years in an attempt to balance the budget. And so anytime you're finding efficiencies, it's always challenging, but especially when you've been doing it for multiple years, it gets harder and harder. Now, option two, they said we can identify even more efficiencies for you, about $4.5 million, but that would require the closure of Lincoln Elementary School. And we said, whoa, obviously we love all of our campuses. That's not something at this point in time that we're willing to do. And based on driving around and seeing new subdivisions starting, knowing that we had a demographic study that was coming, we said we're going to pump the brakes just a little bit and not close Lincoln. Now that we've started to get our demographic study, it shows that was the right decision to make. We will continue to be a growing district, and not only do we need Lincoln as a part of our district, we may need to expand our campuses at some point in the future. So what we did, we said, thank you, TASB, very much. We appreciate your expertise and your thoughts. Some of them, you just don't necessarily understand exactly how Montgomery ISD works. So we're going to create our MISD plan and what we're calling option 3. And so we've identified efficiencies with our principals, with our senior leadership team. We've been conducting budget roadshows. We've gone to every single campus throughout the district and shared this same information. And we've identified approximately $2.3 million of efficiencies. And Dr. Morrison, I'm sure will cover it in a little bit. When we say efficiencies, we're talking about positions and not people. And so what the ultimate goal is to identify those efficiencies through attrition. We're not sending people to the unemployment line. He and I have had conversations with the board about if we get into a situation and where we don't have enough people leave through retirements or resignations, there may be a need potentially to create a bridge type plan to allow those additional positions to continue until those positions become available. So the ultimate goal is not to send anybody to the unemployment line. Now, we don't just singularly want to look at efficiencies and reductions. What else can we do to help bring money to help fund this significant improvement in employee compensation? And so we're looking at additional revenues. We're looking at energy savings. One of the things that we continually hear is, comments from our teachers, our communications council. Hey, we believe there's ways that you can be more efficient with the use of energy resources. We agree. We're actually going to be bringing an RFP to the board on the 20th, asking for them to approve, allowing us to work with an energy management company. Okay, we believe we can save up to $300,000 in year one through this partnership. In addition, we're having conversations with some of our key vendors, for example, our custodial vendor, about the service they're providing and potential renegotiation of those contracts. Okay, so we're working on that aspect as well. We talk about increase in revenues. Based on the demographic study, we project that this district will continue to grow. That's good. More students equals more money. We also are fortunate As the CFO, I like it when the property values go up. As a taxpayer in the district, not so much. I don't like to pay that additional tax bill, but I understand the greater good. And so as our property values continue to go up, that means additional revenue for the district as well. Based on our initial revenue projections for the 21-22 fiscal year, at this point, you can see we've broken it down between local, state, and federal. And so as Dr. Morrison said, the majority of our revenues come from local sources. And for the 21-22 fiscal year, we're projecting an increase in local revenues from just under $65 million to about $66.3 million. And then on the state revenue side, we're looking at a slight decrease from $10.5 million to about 9.9, so just right at 10 million. And then also a little bit of an increase in federal revenues, primarily through SHARS and Medicaid. And so that kind of lets us know additionally what kind of revenue money we're going to have to work with to couple with some of the efficiencies to get to this $3 to $4 million needed for employee compensation.
We're trying to accomplish on behalf of our employees, because as we said, our highest priority as we develop the budget, again, as we look at options and as we engage the community, those options become recommendations that I create. I present those recommendations to the board, who makes the final decision. So we're in the stage right now of looking at options. Options become ultimately a budget that I recommend to the board, and then the board makes the final decision. And so as we're creating the budget, again, we've already said our highest priority is to increase the compensation of our employees to make them more competitive, because the reality is right now they are not. Before I go too further talking about the board, joining board members Lori Turner and Linda Porton is our aforementioned board president, Matt Fuller, sitting in the back. Hey, Matt. So what are we trying to do for our employees? So the first thing is that coming in as the new superintendent, the budget that was passed prior to my arrival did not have a salary increase for our employees last year. We were one of the few regional districts that did not do some sort of increase. And because of everything that our employees were doing, on top of challenging jobs already, then in the world of COVID, with many of our teachers having to do a hybrid instructional model, I went to the board in October and made a request to do a 2% pay increase. A 2% pay increase was not enough, but as I said to our employees at the time, I wanted it to be considered a down payment for what we were going to try to accomplish in the next budget season. Our board understood it, and our board in October passed that 2%. Now, the nice thing is, it was great to be able to say, hey, folks, we recognize how hard this year is. We thank you for everything you're doing. But then you have to make sure that you account for it in the next budget, because a salary increase is a reoccurring cost. And so a 2% raise creates a $1.2 million challenge for the next budget that we have to account for. So if we then started, as we started thinking about employee compensation, saying, well, if we did a 2% for all employees in October, we need to at least do something better than a 2% for this upcoming year. So what if we did for all employees at least a 2.5% raise? And so that creates an additional $1.5 million. So remember when I said somewhere between $3 and $4 million? It starts to go pretty quickly. Now, we absolutely understand we have to prioritize our teachers. When people ask me about the organizational structure of a district, you can see fancy org charts and they all look great. To me, it's very simple. You have in the center of three circles are our students. They are why we are here. If we were a hospital system, it would be patients. When we're an educational system, it is our students. The next circle that surrounds our students are our teachers, and they are the employees who make the most direct impact in our service and education and instruction of students. Then the next circle is everyone else. It's support staff. It is our hardworking food service workers, our hardworking secretaries, paraeducators, administrators, and superintendents. We're all support staff. And so while all of our employees are important, we need to do something for all of our employees as we think about compensation. We need to make sure we prioritize teachers. And so what we said is, what if we were able to augment our teacher salaries, not just with the 2% they got in October, not just with another 2.5% that we propose now. What if we were to give all of our teachers an additional $1,000? That's not a $1,000 one-time stipend. It's an ongoing $1,000 raise, which equivocates to about a 1.7% on top of the 2.5%, on top of the 2% that we already gave in October. Now you start to say, hey, that maybe feels like we're on the right track. But that comes at a cost of $600,000. But then because it truly does take a community of dedicated people to support our schools, and our compensation review showed we are not strong in any area. I wish I could say, hey, auxiliary and clerical were great, professional, we're not as, but teachers, we are not where we needed to be with any employee group, and we have to acknowledge it. The first step in solving any problem is be honest about it and put it out there. And so what we looked at was to say, we need to look at all of our employee groups, professional, auxiliary, and clerical, and in those areas that we are the most egregiously out of whack with our regional competitors, we need to do something for those employees on top of that. So counselors, speech pathologists, different areas of special education where critically hard to fill, hard to staff, and part of the reason it's hard to fill, hard to staff in our district is because they're not where we need to be with compensation. And so that was an additional $400,000. So when you tally all that up, it comes to $3.7 million. So how does that look for a teacher? So we started, because at the end of it, if it doesn't look meaningful for a teacher, then why try to even do this? So we started to say, well, if at the beginning of this past year, with the budget that was passed, the salary schedule for a 5-year teacher was $52,242. So with a 2% that was passed in October, a 1.7% increase that we would do, the $1,000 for teachers, plus the 2.5, which comes to another $1,000 for teachers. When you add all that up, it gets to almost $3,200 from year to year. That starts to feel that's on the right track, okay? So we're starting to feel like that's pretty good. But we didn't stop, because as we looked at the data, as we saw how our teachers are doing the important work they do, and in all of our employees, we needed to try to do more. And as we were assessing the budget, as we were looking at options, as we were looking at anticipated revenue, we challenged ourselves, could we do more? And so we thought we could. So remember, we still have to pay for the 2% raise that was passed in October. That's 2%, $1.2 million we have to budget for. Then we were like, well, 2.5% for all employees. If we could round that up to 3% for all employees, that feels better, but that comes at $1.8 million. And then the $1.7 million, that $1,000 per teacher, is close enough to make it 2% for teachers, which gets that up to $1,250. And then you're starting to say over an 18-month period for a teacher, that would be a 7% raise, 2% in October, and 5% for the upcoming budget that I want to recommend to the board. And then you still need to do the salary augmentation because, again, we have counselors, we have elementary registrars, we have speech pathologists, we have diagnosticians that we are just not where we need to be. So we need some additional augmentation of those salaries. All that gets to be $4.1 million. And so when you look at that salary schedule now, the salary schedule that was presented to the board last year, again, 5-year teacher, $52,242. With the 7% raise that we're anticipating being able to offer the teachers, the 2% already done, 5% additional. Now that 5th-year teacher would be starting at $55,949, which gets us to $3,707. And so now we're starting to feel like, okay, this is really starting to bridge the gap. Does it close the gap between us and some of our regional competitors? It does not. Does it significantly close the gap and make it much narrower? It does. Are we finished with what we're trying to present to the board? We're not. We've spent all day today as a team looking at it. We met with our principals on Monday. Every day we're trying to figure out how to get closer and closer to make the most significant increase in employee compensation that we can. Real quick before I bring Justin up here, one of the things that we are going to do differently, I think the most important way that we can show our employees that they are the priority, and quite frankly, it's just something I've done in my previous districts and I believe Kris has done in his. Annually, we bring to our board for their consideration in April teacher contracts. And the great thing is, as a teacher and school-based employee, you find out, hey, I'm going to have continued employment in the district, and hopefully that makes you feel good. What is interesting is traditionally we have not presented to that employee what their anticipated compensation is going to be. So we tell you you got a job, we just haven't told you how much you should expect. And we think that's not appropriate. And the best way we can be respectful to our employees is to say, not only do we want you to continue your employment with Montgomery ISD, here is the anticipated revenue that we want you to consider as you consider continuing employment with Montgomery ISD. So in April of this year, not only are we presenting contracts for our teachers to the board for their consideration, but they will get a comprehensive compensation plan. And when I say comprehensive, it is truly, it goes through terms, it goes through how we staff, and then ultimately it shows the salary schedules, and as for our employees who are in your maximums, your minimums, and midpoints, as well as also stipends. And so if the board does see fit to pass the compensation plan, that does two things. Number one, as we continue our journey on the budget, because remember this is a budget town hall, it locks and loads as the highest priority for that budget, the compensation plan. Because if they're going to pass a compensation plan that is going to cost about $4 to $4.1 million of additional revenue, then as we budget, ultimately in the budget that I present to the board in May, that they vote on in June, has to account for those raises. And so everything else becomes a secondary priority to our employees. That's the importance of the compensation plan. The second reason the compensation plan is important is not only this year will we be able to present to our employees their contract, but they will get a letter with their salary from this past year, their anticipated salary for this upcoming year with the raises, along with any stipends or other monetary considerations that they are being afforded. And again, we're excited about that as we've done our budget roadshows and shared that with our staff. Quite frankly, in some cases, many of our employees are even more excited about getting a compensation plan than they are about the proposed raises, and they've been pretty excited about the proposed raises as well. Now, there is always a little asterisk to the compensation letter because while we have a pretty good sense, and Kris and I have a philosophy, and I think our board shares it, of, we try to budget conservatively because part of the reason this district has had challenges in the past with balancing the budget is they've hoped high, and when the revenues don't come in or the expenditures have been more than anticipated, then we run a budget deficit, and that's not a good thing. So we budgeted conservatively, but a big part of making sure we budgeted correctly and accurately is to keep an eye on what's going on in Austin. As we know, the legislature is in session, and the legislature the last couple of years has been doing some really good things in terms of school funding here in Texas, but this is a challenging year for a lot of reasons in our state, and so we've been monitoring what's been going on in the legislature, and I'd like to now introduce to you our Director of Communications, who also helps us with government affairs, Mr. Justin Marino.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. That's a phenomenal transition into the next slide, which we are in a legislative session. It's an odd-numbered year, which the Texas legislature meets every other year for 140 days, and there are 181 elected officials right now working in Austin that could have, their actions could have huge implications on this budget process. Going into this legislative session, there were a lot of unknowns. The legislature had come off a session in 2019 where they enacted monumental school finance legislation. However, due to COVID, there were many uncertainties with state revenues, and the state comptroller was projecting budget deficits moving into the session. So many school districts, like Montgomery ISD, adopted legislative platforms, and I'm very proud of the work that went into that. Our platform centered on 5 what we call pillars, school finance being one, assessment and accountability, support for COVID-19 relief, local control, Trustee Porton's favorite pillar of the platform, and of course school safety. And moving into the session, we advocated that the argument from school districts was you just came off a huge session for school finance momentum, at least keep school districts whole. And in SB 1, which is the most important bill of this year, it's the biennial budget. It's a $250 billion state budget, which roughly half is consists of the Foundation School Program, which funds public school districts in Texas. It the current version, which recently passed the Senate, does fund school districts at the levels set in House Bill 3. So that is the good news. Unlike 2019, there is no major school finance legislation this year. It is a very quiet session on school finance reform. There are other issues literally sucking the air out of the Capitol, like ERCOT reform and election reform. So school districts really are looking towards SB 1 as the major finance bill this year. The other issue is federal stimulus funds. There are currently $17.9 billion available to public schools in Texas from the federal government. That money, lawmakers and state officials are still determining how it will be allocated. Will it be supplemented to school district budgets, or will it be supplanted? And we may not know for several weeks, if not months, how those funds will be used. So moving on to the rest of the budget development timeline, this is moving forward. If we went back to where this started, there would be 3 or 4 additional slides on the timeline. I hope this shows our commitment to a deliberative and transparent process. The next key component of the timeline, as Dr. Morrison mentioned, is the adoption of a district compensation plan, which will be proposed to the board on April 20th. The district budget will be put forward to the board in May and posted on the website. And in June, there will be a quarterly budget workshop with the board prior to final adoption. And we can open it up for questions at this time.
Thank you, Justin. So, again, our focus tonight was to talk about budget development, prioritizing our employees, doing something that the district has not done before with presenting to the board a compensation plan, which then becomes really a core commitment of the final draft budget going to the board for their consideration and decision in June. So we wanted to be able to share that with you, give updates in terms of anticipated revenue, state and local, as well as what's happening in Austin. But any aspect of the budget, please feel free to ask questions, give us input, suggestions. We are better when we hear from you. So, questions, suggestions, or ideas? Say hello, Tom. I'm a teacher on special assignment. I know wait time. And again, I'm going to ask you to speak into the mic only because this is being recorded.
Yeah, the question is about the 17.9 billion that's potentially out there, or that is out there for Texas, or not potential. What are we doing, if anything, to plan at all for that? I mean, I realize that there's not full direction on where it can go, but is there anything we can be doing now to help our own case get as much money as we've already paid into the government back to us?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the question. So, yes, absolutely. We are looking at the allocation of what portion of that $17 billion for Texas schools would we get. And that's a lot of money. And the allocation for Montgomery ISD would be a little over $6 million. Now, that $6 million is a lot of money. Trust me, I don't want to say it's not. But you have to start saying, well, how is it that there's $17 billion and Montgomery would only be in line for a little over $6 million? And so let me give you a little explanation of how that money comes. And so the first question is, are we going to get it at all? How is it allocated? Then what can we use it for? So the federal government uses their own formulas for how they send money from the federal government to states through local districts. And it's mostly formulaic, and most of it is based on poverty levels. And so the higher percentage of students you serve who are in poverty, the more money you ultimately qualify for and the more money that you get. And so districts in our state, districts across the country that serve a higher concentration of students in poverty will get more money. Approximately 1 out of every 3 students in Montgomery ISD meets that federal definition. The challenge for us is that the districts around us are and upwards of 50% free and reduced, and so they're going to get significantly more money. The challenge also becomes in terms of how we think about it, versus how other districts think about it, if we even get it at all, and I'll come back to that, is that usually, if you're familiar at all with Title I, Title I funds are the most significant things that are funded from the federal government. And again, the higher percentage of students who serve in poverty, the more money you get. You can only get any Title I funding at a school if you're at least 40% poverty. And so we have 3 schools out of our 10 campuses in Montgomery ISD, Lincoln, Stewart Creek, and Montgomery Elementary School, that do qualify for federal funds because they are Title I campuses. And any Title I dollars we get can only be spent at those 3 campuses. And the guidance on those funds are very, very focused. You can't supplant. So in other words, we can't say, well, every school gets a principal, but we're going to pay for the principals out of those 3 campuses from our Title I funds. It's not the way it works. The Title I funds are very specific. You have to be supporting above your formulaic allocations. So if you want to provide 2 principals out of school, you can pay for one of them out of Title I funds, but you can't pay for anything that you provide at any other school through those federal funds. And so the first thing you have to figure out with this anticipated $17 billion is, the first question is, are we going to get it directly to school districts? And because the state does have traditionally in the past, with federal funds that have been allocated, if you remember back in the recession, there was not anywhere close to this amount, but there was a sizable amount of money that came from Washington, and many, many states supplanted it. In other words, they took that $17 billion and says, well, we're going to just put that in the formula that we allocate to schools anyway, and then we're going to prioritize other things in our state, maybe very important, but since the money's coming from Washington, we can allocate state monies for other things. And so in some cases, school districts don't always get those monies directly that are coming from our federal government. If, in fact, this time those monies do come directly to schools, or some portion of those monies come to school, then we have to figure out, well, what can we use it for? The interesting thing, Jay, is that in this case, at least the initial guidance is, if school districts get those funds, there's actually a lot of latitude with how to use them. So we could use them potentially for maintenance and operations. We could use them for supplementing school programs. We could do things for lost learning time because of the COVID slide, where students were out of school for so long. They did have learning gaps, so we could do summer programs before, during, and after school programs. We can use it for compensation. So far there seems to be a wide range of things that we could use it for, so we have been putting together a plan. I promise you, if we find out tomorrow that we have $6 million additional dollars over the next several years, we'll be presenting very shortly thereafter a plan to the board for how we'd like to allocate that. The challenge, and really where we're trying to get guidance and actually doing some advocacy at the state level, Mr. Fuller and I were talking about this today, is just to make sure there's an equitable distribution. While I appreciate how the federal funding usually goes, I am troubled a little bit because a district doesn't have to use these funds only on their poverty schools and students who are being served from usual Title I funds. That's, in some cases, a good issue to have. In some cases, it causes problems because, again, districts that are smaller than us are going to get 2 to 3 times the amount of funding that we're going to get. And so then it becomes problematic if they're going to flip all that into compensation or additional staffing. It will be challenging for us to keep up with that. But we are looking at it. We're advocating for Montgomery ISD, and we will be hopefully looking forward to getting some of those funds and presenting that as part of our budget to the board. Did I leave anything out, Justin? Okay. Justin's our federal and state guru when it comes to government affairs. So.
Oh, I was just going to say, and then that's just a one-time that we have to remember in our budget for next year, right? Yeah.
So Ms. Borton has been this rodeo a few times, right? And what happens is sometimes, and this happened with federal recovery dollars that came after the recession. You had Race to the Top, and you had school improvement grants, and you had other federal dollars, and school districts are like, oh my gosh, there's all this money, and they put a lot of money into reoccurring costs. And so they created programs, they added to their budgets, and then when the money ran out, then all of a sudden there were some huge cuts that happened across the United States. And so, I think you have to be thoughtful with it in terms of, can you put it into people? Absolutely. Is that a good use for it? Absolutely. Can you also put it into some things that maybe will be a little bit more lasting? Infrastructure? Can you put it into development of programs that you can responsibly anticipate as we grow our budgets over time, this really kind of seeds those programs? Absolutely. The districts that will probably get it wrong to Ms. Porton's questions are those that just port into things that once the money runs out, then you're cutting programs and staffing that the community has come to really appreciate and like. What else? Is American Idol on tonight? I always wonder what's on TV that people are saying, okay, I came here, I appreciate having a little bit of time, but this is what is that? That used to be such a thing. I used to actually, when American Idol was big, I used to my director of communications would say we can't have a meeting that night because of American Idol, but I didn't think it was a thing anymore. Listen, myself, Justin, and Kris will hang around if you have an individual question. We are here to be responsive to you. I'm excited about the budget as it is being developed. There's no part of it that's easy. But ultimately, a budget should reflect the priorities of the school district. Tomorrow, we will have a significant number of our leaders, both our campus-based leaders and my team. We are working day and night on the evolving strategic plan. We have 5 task forces aligned to the 5 priorities that the board has put forward. Our commitment to academic achievement, our commitment to student and staff safety, our commitment to being great fiduciary officers with taxpayer dollars, our commitment to human capital and growing our people, and our commitment to being customer service, creating good cultures, and communications. And so those 5 goals all have task forces led by campus principals and senior leaders. Every one of those task forces has parents, students, teachers, support staff, community members. It's really exciting to see how this work has been evolving. And as we create that plan will go to the board for their consideration in May. And that's very strategic because that plan then becomes how we also fund. And if it's important as an initiative, it ought to be in the strategic plan. It's an important enough initiative to be in the strategic plan, we ought to be able to align it to our budget. And so as we move forward in years to come, when you come to one of these budget town halls, we'll be able to talk about our strategic plan, where we're having success and why we're excited and how we're funding to keep that success. We'll be able to be very transparent and say, here's some areas we're not doing as well as we need to, and here's how we're using the budget as a vehicle to improve. But for this year, we have an evolving strategic plan with an evolving budget. But I am super excited about, as we will show next Tuesday when we present the compensation plan to the board, the highest priority is our employees, and they deserve that. So again, myself, Kris, and Justin will hang around. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for being interested about our budget process. And again, if there's any questions or ideas you have, we're here to listen and learn from you.